At the beginning of the story, the main character dies and is reborn in a fantasy world. After being born into a new household, he observes the surroundings and realizes that technology in this world has not yet advanced. Instead of LED lights, candles are fixed to the ceiling to provide light. At the same time, he also realizes that he has been born into a wealthy family, which makes him happy about this reincarnation because in his real world, he was an orphan who always had to survive through hard work. In this fantasy world, he now has parents, and even his mother is far more beautiful than he had ever expected. His parents given the name Lan. In this way, Leon spends 3 happy years of his life. After turning 3 years old, Leon is able to walk properly. One day, he looks out through the window of his house and finds the view outside extremely wonder. However, at that moment, a maid notices Lion standing by the window. Seeing a small child peeking out like that frightens her, and she quickly takes Leon away, calling it dangerous. By living with his family for several years, Lion learns that his family is part of a grand duche that is very famous throughout the entire kingdom. In this life, Lion has reincarnated as the son of Grand Duke Draonia, who is also referred to as a duke. As time passes, Leon reaches the age of 8, and for the first time, a new sharp sword is placed in his hand so that he can begin learning swordsmanship. Leon feels extremely excited as he has been waiting for a long time to wield a sword. Along with this, he receives another piece of good news when he learns that his teacher will be Gothic, a knight instructor from the royal palace. The Duke has complete faith in his son, as well as strong trust in teacher Gothic's teaching abilities. In the beginning, the training is very easy, but as Leon grows older and reaches the age of 14, teacher Gothic makes the training much more intense. Leon is forced to pull massive rocks to strengthen his muscles, and while enduring this training, he becomes completely exhausted. In his mind, Leon thinks that knights like his teacher are monsters hiding behind a mask of humans because making a child undergo such harsh training feels like child abuse to him. However, he keeps all these complaints to himself and never says them out loud. In this way, by silently enduring and working extremely hard, Leon gradually becomes highly skilled at swordsmanship. He continues to train without complaint because he wants to one day become a Grand Duke and bring pride to his parents. For that reason, the more he learns, the further he can advance. After mastering swordsmanship at the age of 16, Leon begins traveling to different parts of the world because he wants to learn more about the goddess. To become a Grand Duke, Leon understands that he must prove himself not only to his parents but also to the people of the entire kingdom. Leon set out on a world tour in search of opportunity. Believing that only by seeing the world could he find his true purpose, he did not have to wait long before that opportunity appeared. While traveling, Leon arrived at a village that had fallen into chaos. Numerous orcs were attacking the villagers together, overwhelming them without mercy. Seeing his people being slaughtered before his eyes, Leon lost control of his emotion. This moment marked the first time he raised his sword against the enemies of his kingdom. After this incident, Leon finally met the goddess for the first time at the age of 20, the very being he had been searching for all these years. The goddess observed Leon's actions and was pleased by his performance so far. Leon lowered his head in deep respect before her presence. After years of effort and struggle, he finally received her approval and became a holy knight. Becoming a holy knight placed immense responsibility upon Leon's shoulders. He fulfilled those duties relentlessly, eliminating countless orcs, slaughtering goblins, and erasing the existence of evil cults from the land. As a war knight, Leon had the authority to select other knights and form his own unit. Together with his chosen knights, he annihilated nearly 700,000 orcs within a short period, preventing the destruction of countless homes across the kingdom. After completing this mission, Leon felt an unusual sense of refreshment, as though the heavy burden on his mind had finally been lifted. At the age of 35, the living saint and demigod, Argon, Majesty Lionheart, passed away. His death occurred during a battle against an archdemon summoned by the Empire. Leon had already been overwhelmed by goblins and orcs, and the sudden appearance of demons only increased his frustration. What angered him even more was that the Empire's magicians showed greater interest in choosing a successor knight rather than mourning the death of the living saint. It felt as if they were determined to settle the matter on the very day Majesty Lionheart died. Leon saw this behavior as nothing more than political manipulation. Despite this, the goddess recognized only Leon as the most responsible and capable among all knights. For that reason, she entrusted him with the responsibility of becoming king. Accepting this duty was extremely exhausting for Leon. However, when he looked into the eyes of the kingdom's citizens, he chose not to disappoint their hopes. He wished to protect them and ensure no one felt abandoned. Driven by this resolve, Leon accepted the sacred responsibility by wielding Lionheart, the sacred treasure, and committed himself fully to his role. At that moment, Leon's lifelong dream of becoming the Grand Duke of Draonia was fulfilled. Along with his dream, he received an unexpected bonus, ascending the throne as the king of the Liony Heart Kingdom. After becoming king, countless events unfolded over the next 80 years of Lion's life. He was forced to participate in 3 great wars against the orcs. During this time, he also learned that certain goblins were evolving into far more dangerous beings. With this knowledge, the kingdom's situation continued to deteriorate rapidly. Amid this worsening chaos, Lion received devastating news. The dark magicians of the kingdom's academy had resumed their forbidden experiments despite Lion's explicit orders to stop. Lion knew exactly who was behind these actions. His mind could no longer endure the mounting frustration. He understood that some individuals, when granted human rights and freedom, began to see themselves as gods. Such people were unfit even to live as slaves. Despite his rage, Lion still issued orders to suppress and seize them rather than destroy them outright. At the age of 96, several despicable figures within the empire continued to worsen Lion's suffering. Eventually, these individuals destroyed themselves through their own action. Overwhelmed by guilt and abandoned by everyone, they attempted suicide when no help came to them in the end. Leon continued fighting for as long as he could, pushing himself until the age of 121. Despite all his efforts, the world continued to crumble into ruins. At that age, Leon eradicated every evil presence that stood before his eyes. Yet, the darkness never truly disappeared. The cries of the kingdom's people did not cease. They were forced to witness the corpses of their loved ones killed senselessly by evil forces. The tears of the citizens cornered Lion emotionally and forced him to become even more ruthless. He transferred this hardened resolve to his soldiers, igniting their fighting spirit once again and pushing them forward to face the endless war ahead. After reaching so far, after proving his loyalty to the goddess, and after raising his head with pride to honor his parents, Lion could no longer afford to surrender. Having accepted the throne of his kingdom for the sake of the goddess and the citizens, retreat was no longer an option. He had to achieve victory to see a smile return to the faces of the poor and suffering people. He needed to fully prove his devotion to the goddess. Witnessing Lion's unwavering loyalty, the goddess refused to abandon him. With her support, Lion stepped onto the battlefield alongside his soldiers. On a freezing night, facing billions of evils that had seized the land, Lion entered the battlefield with only a handful of warriors. Many soldiers sacrificed their lives while demonstrating their loyalty. Observe, one by one, Lion's soldiers continued to fall. Despite this, Lion did not give up. His mind and body remained unbreakable. The goddess had chosen him, and the hopes of the kingdom's citizens rested upon his shoulder. The people of the holy temples prayed endlessly for his victory. Remembering their support, Leon slaughtered countless demons alone. He wanted those wretched demons to understand the true power of a holy knight. By the age of 217, winter was nearing its end. Lion had taken no rest, continuing to kill demons without pause. As the battles dragged on, Leon's age continued to rise. Yet he never stopped fighting. Finally, at the age of 256, Lion discovered the gate through which demons were entering the world. Once the gate was destroyed, the surviving demons had no path to escape. At the same time, no new demons could enter the world for reinforcements. Leon was consumed by rage, knowing that he was about to eliminate every last remaining demon. Witnessing Lion's overwhelming power, the demons began to panic. By the age of 300, Leon single-handedly eliminated the most dangerous archdemon with a single slash. Through endless combat, Lion had transformed into a living weapon of war. He had lost track of how much time had passed while exterminating demons. Even after all demons were defeated, his body continued to move like a machine, prepared to fight once more. Some people failed to recognize Lion at first. Seeing his condition, they were left in shock, as he had grown powerful enough to slay an archdemon in a single strike. Lion then revealed his identity. He was the king of the Liony Heart Kingdom, the knight of the glorious knights, and the agent who carried out the will of the holy temples. Leon Draonia Lionheart. After centuries of battling demons, Lion's clothes had been reduced to dust and dirt, leaving him nearly unclothed. Seeing him in such a state, the girl who questioned him was utterly shocked. Lion had reached his 300th year, the age at which his mission was finally complete. At that moment, a system window appeared with a notification stating that all demons had been defeated. It declared that the Night King had returned. In the next scene, it is revealed that a black gate suddenly appeared in Seoul City, Korea. This unexpected incident made both the Korean Hunter Association and the World Hunter Association extremely worried. They had no idea about the level of monsters inside the gate, which is why no one was willing to enter it. However, the government forced the Korean Hunter Association to step inside the gate. As a result, the hunters were compelled to challenge death itself. When they finally appeared inside the gate, instead of monsters, they found Leon standing there in a naked condition. This was the exact moment when Lion was finishing off the last remaining demons. After spending so many years slaughtering demons, his clothes had completely turned to dust and soil. Seeing Lion in this state, the hunters of the Korean Hunter Association were completely shocked. Yet, they had no choice but to bring him back to Korea. The story then introduces the manager of the Korean Hunter Association, whose name is Han Hadi. Soon after, the head manager of the Korean Hunter Association, Kim Jin-soo, is also introduced. The association's hunters were convinced that inside the Black Gate, there must have been the Demon King along with an entire army of demons. They believed that defeating them would require 3 to 4 hunter associations working together. Because of this, they found it hard to believe that Leon had defeated all those monsters alone. After that, the narrative explains the similarities between gates. Most of the worlds inside the gates that appear around the world are largely similar. Those worlds are usually completely destroyed due to monsters. However, sometimes a few survivors manage to escape through the gate into another world. These survivors gain different kinds of unique skills after fighting demons. This is the reason the government ordered hunter associations to search for and gather such individuals. And Han Hari and Kim Jin-soo had personally witnessed Lion killing the devil with a single strike after the gate appeared. Because of this, they firmly believed that Lion was extremely strong. In a situation where even an A-rank hunter is afraid to fight the Devil King, Lion had defeated countless monsters alone and still managed to kill the Devil King. Due to this, they decided that they must communicate with Lion properly, no matter what it takes. However, they were troubled by the way Lion represented himself, as it made them unwilling to believe that he truly belonged to a noble or royal family. Their world had already become highly advanced, and there was no longer any concept of royal families, kings, or empires. Despite this, Han Hari trusted Lion. She believed that Lion was a good person. As everyone moves forward together to gather more information and communicate with Lion, he suddenly loses his temper and starts shouting at them. In effect, the force of his voice shatters all the glass in the communication room. It is hard for them to believe that this was the same room where monsters were usually imprisoned. Yet, Lion destroyed it using only his voice. Leon is furious because he feels that modern culture is mocking his own culture. He begins to harshly scold the people present there. And seeing this, Kim Jin-soo finds it difficult to believe that Han Hari could call someone as arrogant as Lion a good person. The scene then shifts smoothly to 15 minutes earlier when Lion's details were being recorded. During that time, Lion recalls memories of Seoul City. Before his reincarnation, he had lived there as an orphan, leading an ordinary life while working countless jobs to earn money. He eventually died at the age of 20. After his death, he was reincarnated into a magical world where he became part of a proper and respected family. He ruled his kingdom as a king for many years. Before dying after living for a total of 300 years, he hunted numerous monsters in order to cleanse his world. And now, suddenly, he had returned to the very same world from which he had once departed for that magical fairy world. Because Lion had lived as a king in that fairy world for so many years, his behavior had naturally adapted to that royal way of life compared to his short 20-year life in the modern world. He valued his 300-year life far more. This is why he had no desire to return to the modern world at all. Seeing the anger on Lion's face, the instructor becomes nervous and starts addressing him by his name, Leonhardt. This only angers Leon further, and he demands to be addressed as Your Majesty. The instructor is forced to obey Leon's demand because when the government was informed about Lion's abilities, it strictly ordered that Lion must be treated with special hospitality. After addressing him as Your Majesty, the instructor directly asks Lion whether he has finished eliminating all the monsters from his world. Lion immediately answers yes, and said he further explains that as the king of his kingdom, it was his duty to protect his land, and therefore he personally hunted down and eliminated all the monsters. Leon then personally orders the instructor to become his temporary secretary. He believes that if the instructor accepts this role, Lion can show him a glimpse of his true power. During their conversation, Lion also starts asking questions about the modern world because he wants to know what changes occurred after his death. The instructor explains everything in detail. 30 years ago, gates suddenly began appearing in their world from which monsters and demons emerged and tortured humanity. After enduring years of destruction, humans began investigating the gates and eventually discovered that every gate connects to another world. These worlds are completely destroyed by monsters, and the responsibility of safely collecting survivors from those worlds was given to the Soul government. This is the reason they are now interrogating Lion. After explaining all this, the instructor leaves to bring a meal for Lion. After hearing everything, Leon begins comparing the monsters from his own world with the monsters of the modern world. He comes to the conclusion that in this modern era, humans are trained specifically to fight against monsters. As he continues thinking, the instructor returns with the meal. The meal brought for Lion is revealed to be a bone broth boiled for hours topped with salt, pepper, and some crunchy kimchi. Leon clearly remembers that people used to enjoy this meal a lot. However, before his reincarnation, when he was working as a laborer at the age of 20, he was forced to eat this meal even when he had no desire to. After becoming Your Majesty, Leon's life had completely changed. He could no longer eat food meant for common laborers under any circumstances. Just seeing the meal fills him with intense anger. He starts shouting harshly at the instructor and begins insulting him severely. He even goes as far as questioning whether their kingdom insults people from other kingdoms by serving such a meal. The instructor is shown retreating into a corner in fear, trembling like a mouse. Leon Draonia Lionheart, a royal from the other world, a proxy for the gods, the guardian of the Holy Grail, and the owner of the Holy Blade and the Holy Spear, stands there in fury. He then knocks the meal to the ground. Molly's, the Lord of Chaos, the Lord of the 23 Great Devils, the arch-nemesis of demons who has killed millions of them, and the very incarnation of the 300-year war itself, cannot believe what he is seeing. After returning to Earth following 300 years, Leon finds it hard to accept how badly the real world has deteriorated. He becomes convinced that this is all because there is no proper religious faith left in this world. Even after returning to Earth, and Leon had already decided that he would continue living the same life he had lived for 300 years. It is because of this resolve that he completely refuses to accept the meal placed before him. After some time, Leon calmly picked up a fork and knife and began eating the steak placed before him. Watching the scene through the camera feed, Jin-Soo Kamei questioned how Hari could have known that chicken and barley were considered food for ordinary mortals. As she reflected on it, she closed her eyes and concluded that at least Lion was consuming steak accompanied by a bottle of red wine from the year 1992. Jin-Soo stood there with beads of sweat forming on his face, arms crossed tightly, urging Hadi to be the one to go first. Hadi pointed to herself in disbelief, loudly, expressing that she had no idea how to speak in a historical or ceremonial tone. Jin-Soo, still frozen in the same posture, reasoned that Lion seemed to view her favorably. After all, he had praised her bravery earlier, which meant she was unlikely to be expelled. Hari maintained her stance, insisting that he had only called her brave in passing. Eventually, with visible nervousness, Hadi opened the door and entered the room. She apologized profusely for interrupting the meal. Leon, wearing a composed expression, wiped his mouth with a towel and immediately recognized her as the swordswoman from before, instructing her to sit. Hadi responded with a bright smile, while Jin-Soo observed everything through the camera mounted in the room, catching the moment when Hadi subtly placed her hand behind her back and flashed a thumbs up. Seated at the table, Hadi maintained her smile and asked whether the food was to Leon's liking. Leon closed his eyes briefly, tilting his head downward, and reflected that the meal was acceptable. He acknowledged the chef's diligence and refined technique before lifting his head and crossing his arms once more. He clarified that the difficulties he had caused were not due to dissatisfaction with the food, but stemmed from a manner in which they had conducted themselves toward a king during their first meeting. He emphasized that while urgent missions were understandable, representatives from another nation were entitled to respect, as it directly reflected the prestige of their country. Hari, visibly sweating, admitted that their lack of knowledge had led to unintentional disrespect. Lion remained unmoved and asked her name, confirming it was Hadi. She lowered her gaze and provided her full name. Lion then mentioned hearing stories about this world, including the appearance of demons on Earth, seeking confirmation. Hadi straightened her posture, placing her hands on her knees, and explained that while she could not be certain of everything, the matter would ultimately need to be resolved by their government. She further explained that intelligence agents in the 21st century were tasked with recruiting survivors at all costs, even if that required offering extensive support. Allowing such individuals to fall into the hands of other nations was unacceptable. Leon listened intently before stating that settling in this world required responsibility. If one bore the title of a noble knight, then one must fight on the battlefield. Hadi responded enthusiastically, declaring that he would then be welcomed into the Hunter Association. Lane's expression hardened as he crossed his arms, declaring that a king could not fight under the banner of another kingdom. Instead, he intended to establish a new knightly order in this world. Hari glanced nervously at the camera in the corner of the room, sweat forming on her face before nodding in reluctant agreement. Later, after exiting the room, Hari questioned Jin-Soo about the higher-up's response. Jin-Soo answered casually, hands in his pockets, explaining that the instruction was to provide as much support as possible. It was already fortunate that Lion had not defected to another country or joined a major guild. Hadi frowned deeply, remarking that it was difficult to accept the idea of both the government and the association bowing to a single individual. Her anger flared as she blamed the large guilds who flaunted wealth and power. Jin-Soo, sweating slightly, suddenly recalled the Phoenix Guild. At that moment, a red warning light flashed throughout the room as alarms blared. He quickly checked his phone, his face turning pale as he read a notification about a dungeon breakthrough occurring on the Conan Plain. He realized that if the breakthrough occurred near the granary, food production could collapse due to monster contamination. Hari reacted in confusion, questioning how this could happen. When the Phoenix Guild's S-rank hunter, Yin Wan, was stationed there, Jin-Soo clenched his teeth. Convinced that those reckless individuals had ulterior motives, he insisted they move immediately to stop the Phoenix Guild from worsening the situation. Leon, overhearing the commotion from behind the door, sensed that something catastrophic had occurred. He raised his hand, energy gathering within it, recalling that dungeon breakthroughs polluted the land and rendered crops infertile. This world lacked what he needed most. He stared at his glowing hand calmly, wondering if everything was truly in order. Briefly, recalling the blonde goddess era. At the Orange Gate, Jin-Soo confronted Yinwan, demanding an explanation. Yinwan responded with a sly grin, mocking the arrival of the association members and their new recruit. Jin-Soo gritted his teeth, realizing the Phoenix Guild had likely provoked the breakthrough intentionally after their tax exemption requests had been denied. The guild had been earning massive profits from magic crystals and monster materials and now sought exemption from the trillion-unit tax. Hari stepped forward, pressing a hand to her chest, demanding the gate be closed immediately. Yin interrupted her, dismissively, stating that he understood everything. He explained that ownership rights would eventually transfer, but claimed the guild was currently too weakened to act effectively. He promised minimal effort until the following day, leaving the outcome uncertain. Hari confronted him angrily, questioning his patriot. Vinsu grabit her shoulder, urging restraint. She shouted that Yanj knew exactly what pollution of the Honan Plains would cause. Yinjan snapped back, accusing her of childish idealism and reminding her that justice in the world was dictated by money and power. At that moment, Lion appeared, criticizing them as vulgar and outdated. Hadi stared at him in shock, asking what he was doing there. Lion reprimanded her for using his name freely, reminding her that only his title was permitted. Yin Wan, sweating, questioned Lion's identity. Lion silenced him harshly, declaring that someone of such low standing had no right to address him. Enraged, Yan Wan prepared to strike, demanding to know if Lion sought death. Hari shouted for him to stop, explaining that Lion was a survivor. Yin Wan froze, stunned, and quickly bowed in apology. Realizing Lion might be from the Black Gate, Lion dismissed him coldly and instructed Hari to explain the situation in full detail. Jin-Soo clenched his fist to his chest, secretly wondering if Lion truly intended to help. Hadi nodded confidently and explained the phenomenon of a dungeon breakthrough, describing how monsters flooded out, polluting land and destroying crops. Since the Honan Plains were vital for grain production, the situation was critical. Leon asked how the issue could be resolved. Hadi explained that the polluted land had to be purified, the dungeon cleared, and the gate itself destroyed. Leon acknowledged her explanation and declared that after gathering forces and settling all trivial matters, he would personally act. He emphasized, however, that foreign military action required formal permission. Laws and procedures had to be respected. A report needed to be sent to King Yangon. Jin-Soo silently noted that Lion was even more rigid than himself. Eventually, the president was contacted mid-flight and informed of the situation. Later, Hadi approached Lion with confusion, holding a straw doll, explaining that everything he requested had already been prepared. Lion clarified that the polluted land required cleansing. When she questioned how a straw doll could accomplish that, Leon explained that only two conditions were required. He inspected the women who had made the dolls, stating that they must be crafted by women experienced in childbirth. A competition followed with Lion ruthlessly tearing apart most of the dolls, declaring them failures. Only one caught his attention. Crafted by an 80-year-old woman. Astonished, Leon held her hands and learned she had given birth to 12 children. He declared her a true embodiment of patriotism. Although he wished to honor her properly, circumstances prevented it. Later, Leon placed the doll on a wooden table beside a candle. A blue magical disc appeared as the ritual conditions were fulfilled. A bowl was placed before the doll, offered as a harvest gift to the mother of fertile land. King Yanggong watched in stunned silence as a golden beam descended from the sky, filling the bowl with water. As dawn broke and crimson light painted the clouds, a new day began, one destined to mark a turning point for the world. The water seeped into the doll, which slowly stood upright. Dara entered the vessel, calling out to her child, Lionheart. Leon bowed respectfully, greeting the goddess of life and fertility. Their reunion marked the return of something ancient, powerful, and world-altering. A divine presence had descended upon the land. Dra remained unmoving as she acknowledged that this new world, much like others before it, was under assault by demonic forces. The soil itself had been deeply corrupted, saturated with malignant energy. Leyen shared her concern, recognizing with a solemn expression that evil had taken root here unchecked. Unlike other realms, this land had existed without the guidance of any deity. Turning his attention briefly toward Wang, Leyen expressed unease that impure and low-grade creatures were allowed to exist beneath the goddess's gaze. Dra, however, regarded the scene with calm amusement. She viewed ignorance and greed not as sins, but as unavoidable traits of mortal existence. Such flaws were simply part of life itself. She then awaited Leyen's intentions moving forward. With his eyes closed, Leyen reflected that incompetence among swordsmen often brought fleeting fame, yet true authority was bound by sacred law. Opening his eyes, he placed a hand over his chest and resolved to establish a balance where duty and power stood equal. He would guide the ignorant, correct their path, and oversee the creation of a new pantheon for this world. Dra's form emerged from the straw doll, reminding her child that she was always prepared to grant a request. Leyen knelt before her and acknowledged that the people of this land were suffering under pervasive evil energy. Though he knew this might not fall under her direct responsibility, he asked for her aid in purifying and healing the corrupted land. Dra responded with a gentle smile, declaring Leon her priest and champion. Open her. However, she clarified that this world was not part of her divine body. If he wished for her protection, her faith must spread until this land itself became an extension of her existence. Only then would all creation support him. She extended her hand, releasing a single droplet of water infused with golden light. As it touched the ground, a massive beam of light descended from the sky. Onlookers watched in shock, sweat forming on their brows. Leyen turned toward them with an imposing presence, making it clear that those who lacked knowledge or understanding were witnessing the rebirth of life itself. The once barren fields began to bloom before their eyes. Standing firmly, Leyen spread his arms and declared that this world would now move in harmony with the deity. Life was meant to flourish, and people were expected to multiply and prosper. Just as the fertile land before them stood as proof of an eternal covenant, Yam Wing, visibly distressed, tore stalks of wheat from the ground and crushed them in his fist, warning others not to be deceived. He believed crops grown through magic were poisonous and dangerous, and Leyen reacted with fury, asserting that the harvest was divinely blessed and condemning any attempt to label it as harmful. Yam Wang stubbornly insisted that the source was merely a straw at all. Leyen dismissed this ignorance, stating that forgiveness for such disrespect was limited. Desecrating the goddess through careless words was unacceptable. Yamwing recoiled internally, realizing that this situation threatened all his carefully laid plans. Still, he resolved not to let it end there. He decided that the truth must be exposed for the sake of the people who would consume the harvest. An appraiser was nominated. After donning gloves, the appraiser summoned magical energy and initiated the assessment. The system window revealed shocking results. The crops were rare blessed seed rice infused with divine power from Dara, the goddess of life and fertility, continuous consumption, improved third-stage diseases, and carried a high probability of healing severe illnesses, including cancer. The appraiser announced the findings with visible astonishment. Hadi, stunned, picked up the wheat stalks to confirm the result. Shinsa suggested testing the harvest properly, leading to a cauldron being brought from the local administrator's residence. Rice was cooked on site. Jinsu sampled it and immediately checked the system window, which reported massive recovery boosts to stamina, strength, and mana, a mention. The effects rivaled high-grade tonics worth millions. As Su continued eating with a serious demeanor, he realized the implications. This blessing did not appear limited to the rice alone. Every living creature in the surrounding area had likely been affected. The hunters, now energized and excited, voiced their determination to enter the gate with full buffs. Morale across the Hunter Association surged. Diera turned to Lion, sensing her role in this matter had reached its end. Lion bowed respectfully, expressing eternal gratitude for the blessings bestowed by the Mother of the Earth. Diera placed her hand upon his head one last time, gently scolding him and reminding him never to allow himself to go hungry, no matter where fate led him. With that, the straw doll collapsed lifelessly onto the wooden table. As Hari turned toward Lion to speak, he interrupted her thoughts by questioning the existence of other deities in this world. She admitted uncertainty and responded solemnly, emphasizing that righteous living and peace were achieved through harmony with the divine. With the soldiers replenished and strengthened, preparations to enter the gate were complete. Elsewhere, members of the Phoenix Guild watched the situation deteriorate. They realized their plan was unraveling, all due to the interference of the survivor. Ye Wang, seething with anger, blamed the ruined political leverage on Lion's existence. Had he not appeared, the weakened government would have yielded to their demands. Yayan Wang entertained darker thoughts, believing matters would have been simpler had the survivor perished beyond the gate. With a sinister smile, he dismissed concerns, confident that previous attempts to close the gate had already weakened their enemies. Even if the survivor carried divine blessings, he was likely insignificant in combat. Monsters within the gate could not be destroyed by conventional means. As his confidence peaked, the system window suddenly issued a fatal notification. A dungeon breakthrough had officially begun. The countdown toward annihilation had started. After some time, the group passed through the gate and stepped into the dungeon beyond. Leon gazed forward with a stern expression, explaining that most gates usually sealed themselves once the quest was cleared or the boss was defeated. It preferred facing bosses alone, treating them as personal trials. Hadi, sweat forming on her forehead, struggled to point out that dungeon raids were normally handled in coordinated groups. Leon's attention shifted downward to the skeleton crushed beneath his foot, and he remarked that he had heard of ordinary hunters attempting dungeon clears before, yet this place seemed to contain far more monsters than expected. Hari responded by explaining the dungeon's unique trait. She extended her arms slightly while facing him, clarifying that in normal gates, the monster count gradually dropped as enemies were defeated. Skeletons, zombies, and even demons in rare cases would eventually thin out. However, as long as the boss remained alive, these creatures would continue to respawn endlessly. Leon folded his arms, his expression tightening with interest, realizing that the dungeon would only end once the boss was eliminated. This confirmed his suspicion that they were dealing with a special type dungeon. Hari stepped forward with a faint smile, believing there was a high chance her assumption was correct. She speculated that a necromancer might be controlling the skeletons, though unease crept across her face as she checked the system window. A notification appeared announcing that the dungeon breakthrough had begun. All living beings inside the gate were now under a strict time limit. The commander Knight of Dullahan was advancing with its army, and defeating the commander was now mandatory. The remaining time was set at 3 hours. An overwhelming sense of dread spread through everyone inside the gate. Jin Su turned toward Alan, sweat dripping down his face, and cursed Yanhuan internally for failing to warn them. The skeleton army began marching forward with clear hostile intent. The system window updated once more, reiterating that the Dullahan commander must be defeated. The remaining time dropped to 2 hours and 58 minutes. Members of the Hunter Association stared ahead nervously, overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. One of them asked their leader whether potions should be distributed. Jin Su, holding his ground, ordered that supplies be shared as evenly as possible. He then asked Mansik about their current manpower. Sheik, his eyes glowing faintly green with aura, reported that they had 30 archers and 2 mages available. Jan Su clenched his teeth and raised his shield, directing those with sniper skills to focus on distant targets while shield bearers halted the enemy's advance. Without changing his stance, he stared at the advancing skeleton horde. Convinced that the enemy was already doomed, one skeleton lunged forward and struck, but Jim Su blocked the attack with a shield. Sweat streamed down his face as he reassessed the situation, realizing the skeletons were stronger than expected. Orange Gates truly were different, though they still fell within the limits of a B-rank tank like himself. Swinging his hammer, Jin Su crushed a skeleton and paused when he noticed a strange blue aura forming behind him. Confusion crossed his face as he wondered how such basic undead could wield spells of such an advanced level. 2 skeleton mages raised their hands, blue energy swirling as magic circles formed. Jin-Soo stepped forward with resolve, drawing their attention toward himself. If anyone was going to take the hits, it had to be him. A glowing magic sphere was hurled toward him and detonated on impact. Amid the chaos, someone called out to their leader. Jin-Soo, battered but standing, held his shield firmly and signaled that he was unharmed. Having only suffered minor damage, he was keenly aware that his equipment had cost a fortune. Raising his gaze, he locked eyes with the Dullahan commander standing ahead, gripping his hammer tightly as he realized the true boss was now before him. The Dullahan moved with terrifying speed, slashing forward and sending Jin-Soo flying backward in a trail of blue energy. He crashed onto the ground, coughing as he struggled to rise. Hari watched in shock, sweat dripping down her face as she urgently called for help. A female member of the Hunter Association turned toward Hari's deputy, suggesting that they rush to save Jin-Soo or call in reinforcements. Hari, however, understood that this situation was precisely why a backup force existed. This was the moment they needed to act. She glanced toward Lion, briefly considering his past achievements as the king who had defeated a great demon. Her thoughts cut short. She urgently requested his assistance. Lion responded with clear disdain, believing it beneath a king to involve himself in such a minor battle. His pride revolved around honor and dignity, and he found it insulting to be pushed into fighting what he considered worthless undead. The sight of the bones alone disgusted him, and he viewed the request as disrespectful to the goddess herself. Hadi was left confused by his attitude. Nearby, the Hunter Association girl lowered her head sadly, uncertain of what to do next. Hari's expression hardened as she realized there was no time left to hesitate. Lion had no intention of helping, caring only about the Dahan itself. If they wanted to survive, they had to act on their own. Drawing her sword, Hadi ordered everyone to support their leader and fellow hunters. She charged forward at full speed into the skeleton crowd, using the skull of one enemy as a stepping stone to leap toward the Dullahan. She swung her sword, but the attack was blocked by the commander's weapon. Sweat dripped down her face as she realized how formidable her opponent was. Her goal became clear. She had to separate the Dullahan from the rest of the battlefield. The Dullahan suddenly hurled its head into the air and swung its arm. Hadi stared in confusion, wondering why an undead would fight in such an absurd way. In the next instant, the commander's strike sent her flying, crashing into the ground. Bruised and aching, Hari realized this outcome worked in her favor. She had succeeded in drawing the Dullahan away from the others. Rising to her feet, she faced the commander alone and unleashed her skill. Flames erupted outward, engulfing the surrounding area in a violent blaze. The Dullahan reacted wildly, swinging through the air as fire consumed the space around them. With a serious expression, Hari charged forward again, her sword wrapped in roaring flames. She believed this attack would finally succeed. She struck with full force, but the Dullahan blocked the blow. Shock filled her expression as she realized it had deflected the attack using the blunt side of its sword. Sweat poured down her face as she advanced again, studying its stance carefully. The Dullahan countered with a devastating swing that left a blue trail behind it, but Hari narrowly dodged the attack. Lion watched the exchange calmly, clapping in admiration. He was impressed by the Dullahan's swordsmanship, especially considering it fought with only one arm. In his eyes, this creature had clearly once been a noble knight. He felt ashamed for having mistaken such a warrior for a mere undead. Declaring his identity as King Lionheart, Lion granted the nameless knight the honor of a duel, insisting the battle should end between two knights rather than harming soldiers further. Jin-Soo and Hari were stunned by this turn of events. Unable to believe that Lion had challenged the boss directly, the Dullahan stood still, holding its head in one hand and staring forward. The plan had worked. Leon faced the Dullahan with a grave expression, his arms crossing as he assessed his opponent. From the way the undead knight carried himself, Lion recognized him as someone bound by honor. Drawing his sword from the glowing magic circle, Lion made it clear through his actions that the Dullahan did not need to restrain himself. A true duel could not exist if one fighter was limited to a single hand, especially when Lion's fencing style required both. Hadi stepped closer, turning her attention to the king and urgently explaining that the Dullahan would not perish unless his head was severed. Lion listened calmly and questioned whether that condition truly mattered. Sweat formed on Har's face as she insisted that it was crucial, wondering how Lion could hope to win without decapitating his opponent. Lion, however, remained unmoved. For him, the outcome of battle was dictated not by tricks, but by the honor of a knight. Maintaining his stance, Lion gripped his sword firmly and fixed his gaze on the Dullahan. The air around them tightened as Layan stood tall, bearing the presence of one who carried immense authority. He was known as the first Knight of Erin, the goddess of light and justice, the great Duke of Draonia, and the liony heart, who challenged even the noblest of warriors. The Dahan launched an attack, yet Lion managed to halt the strike using only one hand. In a composed motion, Lion pressed his blade lightly against the Delahan's neck where blue flames flickered, signaling that he had intercepted the blow for the first time. Enraged, the Delahan rose and grasped his sword with both hands, unleashing a powerful swing that carved a yellow streak through the air. Hari watched in panic, sweat streaming down her face as she feared Lion would be unable to block such overwhelming force. Despite the danger, Lion remained steady. Though his footing wavered for a brief moment, he deflected the attack with astonishing speed. Observers struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Jinnu, visibly anxious, questioned whether anyone had truly seen Lion's movement. A representative from the Hunter Association wondered aloud if Lion had been struck at all. Jinsu turned to Hari in confusion, seeking confirmation. Hattie reacted with awe, declaring the moment incredible. She alone fully understood what had occurred. In the instant their swords met, Layan had rotated his blade, shifted his center of gravity, and performed a precise lateral movement. The maneuver was so dangerous and advanced that even she lacked the courage to attempt it herself. Layan calmly placed his sword against the Delahan's head once more, marking the second successful interception. The Delahan was forced to retreat and regain his stance. He concluded that such technique was only possible due to Lion's terrifying strength. Memories stirred within him, memories of a distant past when he was still treated as a knight and challenged others in honorable duels. The Delahan attacked again, and Layan blocked once more. The undead knight reasoned that this must be some kind of trick, a method to overcome impossible odds. Anyone hearing of such feats would assume deception. As the Delahan continued swinging, the situation felt increasingly absurd. Even the idea of forcing Lion to dismount seemed laughable now. Observing Lion's posture and appearance, it became evident that he resembled a veteran hardened by countless battlefields. His eyes sparkled with intensity, chasing victory with unwavering seriousness, embodying honor and glory. Lion advanced without hesitation, choosing to meet the next strike head-on. He parried the attack cleanly and countered, marking yet another successful interception. By the third time Lion caught his blade, doubt crept into the Dullahan's thoughts. Would Lion continue blocking endlessly? To the Dullahan, Layan represented the pinnacle of honor, the ideal knight that all others aspire to become. He was the king of knights, a figure worthy of admiration and challenge. Driven by resolve, the Dullahan charged forward, determined to continue the duel without relying on necromantic magic. As a knight, he wished to clash swords purely through skill. He longed to cross blades with Lion repeatedly, reliving a life he had forgotten. A life spent wandering the world as a noble knight, engaging in glorious battles. Another strike followed, but Lion deflected it so forcefully that the Dullahan sword was sent spinning away before crashing onto the ground. Layan remained composed, his blade poised, having intercepted the Dahan's attacks 10 times in total. With each exchange, Lion's sword play grew more refined, awakening fragments of the Dallahan's lost memories. The undead knight gazed at Lion, realizing that the noble knight he once was had returned to him through this fallen spirit. The glory of the past surged within him. Layan stayed motionless and turned his attention toward the knight, silently, questioning whether the duel would continue. A skeleton approached, holding the Dullahan's severed head and offering it back to him. Holding his own head, the Dullahan reflected on the countless years wasted in meaningless slaughter, on battles repeated endlessly without honor. If his cursed journey could conclude here, then there was no greater happiness. The Dullahan knelt, presenting his head to Lion in acceptance. Layan regarded him with a gentle smile, satisfied that the knight's honor had been restored. Placing a hand upon the Dullahan's head, Leon closed his eyes and offered prayer. If a god watched over him, Layan wished for the knight's soul to find peace. If not, then he entrusted him to the goddess, hoping she would guide him to the Garden of Eden. Leon opened his eyes, smiling warmly as he looked upon the Dullahan. Turning toward the fallen knight, he expressed hope that they would meet again at the feast of the gods. As light filled the air, the Dullahan's body slowly dissolved, his final wish being for the glory of Draonia Lionheart. Sometime later, Hari and Chinsu stood among the remaining association workers. Hari gazed ahead with confidence, acknowledging that the promise had been fulfilled. Chinsu, still astonished, realized that everything had truly ended in a duel. Hadi rested her hand against her chin thoughtfully, wondering about the nature of the light had invoked. Chinsu speculated that it must have been a form of holy power, explaining why all the undead had evaporated. Exhaustion crept into Haru's expression as she remarked that if Lion possessed such an ability, he could have ended the battle much earlier. Lion approached them with confidence, his hands clasped behind his back. He questioned whether that noble knight had been granted a fitting end worthy of a great general. Haru turned toward him and formally addressed him, reflecting on the nature of knighthood. To her, a knight was defined by honor and glory, which stemmed from one's actions, and those actions were born from will. If the Delahan had truly been a noble knight, then the outcome they witnessed was the only possible answer. Lion turned away once more, casually asking whether it was time to collect the loot. What's he? Beads of sweat forming again, stared at him in disbelief, questioning his priorities. Lion reasoned that a battle naturally resulted in spoils. On a black cloth nearby lay a magic orb radiating a pink aura alongside a black sword. Chinsu bent down in shock, pointing out the orb's overwhelming magical power. Haru also looked down in amazement, noticing that the great sword and the Dullahan's cloak remained behind as well. Nearby, a purple orb pulsed with energy atop a soft pillow. Lion glanced at it with visible irritation, declaring that the item was defective and belonged in the trash. A shattered gray fragment from the ball rested quietly on the pillow. Everyone's attention drifted toward Lion, who stood beside it with his arms crossed, clearly displeased. His expression suggested that objects like this never brought anything but complications. Shortly after, a system window appeared, announcing the final rewards from the cleared Onum Gate. Among the loot were the Durkin cloak, a sword, and several magical stones, confirming that the gate had been fully conquered. Sometime later, Haru leaned against the edge of a table, her face drained of energy. Several days had passed since Lion's return to Earth, yet those few days felt overwhelmingly long. Dark circles marked her eyes for constant exhaustion. Too many events had piled up at once. At first, the chaos centered around tax-related issues, which spiraled into frustration. Lion reacted sharply, unable to comprehend how one ruler could demand taxes from another sovereign, especially a foreign one. Even the idea of paying with magic stones seemed absurd to him. He dismissed the matter entirely, believing that a king should never concern himself with counting coins. Huddy, already worn down, found it impossible to argue further. She urged him to stop obsessing over money as larger goals lay ahead. To establish a deity within the land, new believers were being accepted. As people lined up, an elderly man stepped forward, uncertain about how offerings were to be paid. Leon, maintaining a stern demeanor, explained that a single share of the harvest required an enormous donation, 19 trillion in value. The generosity expected from the believers bordered on extreme. The old man struggled to process this, already burdened by high taxes and living costs. The thought of surrendering 90% of his harvest felt unbearable. Leon responded by folding his arms confidently, making it clear that devotion left no room for worrying about personal hunger. His guild would oversee food, shelter, and every necessity required for living. Haru glanced down at the document in her hands and smiled faintly. When viewed differently, the rice being discussed was considered blessed and thus priceless. The old man stared at the paper in disbelief when he saw the listed price, 150 million for just 80 kilograms of rice. The cost of a single bag was staggering. Surrendering even a fraction of that harvest would leave almost nothing behind. Leon, however, looked ahead with complete assurance. Meanwhile, another issue surfaced. Leon's living arrangements. Ding. Inside a room, he crossed his arms in irritation. The space failed to resemble a battlefield and lacked any artistic value. Without art, the royal chambers felt meaningless to him. He demanded extravagant conditions, the most luxurious bed available, servants on constant standby, and artwork that could be admired endlessly. Eventually, Haru attempted to rent a 5-star hotel room. The process dragged on until 2 o'clock in the morning. Exhausted and emotional, she had dropped to her knees, begging him to rest. She finally compromised by agreeing to carefully place paintings and ceramic decorations throughout the hotel under specific conditions. That was how the current situation came to be. At that moment, Haru announced her arrival with raised urgency. She entered the room drenched in sweat, pushing a table forward while checking on Lion's condition. He sat calmly before a panoramic window, appearing perfectly fine. She smiled and continued arranging the table, informing him that breakfast had been prepared. Leon, holding a glass of wine, seemed lost in thought, and he acknowledged her presence and suggested she eat when she found time. She nodded weakly, fatigue evident in every movement. The table overflowed with elaborate dishes. Hari admired the food, thinking it looked wonderful, though she planned to settle for something simple later. Leon closed his eyes briefly, resting his hand against his leg, then motioned for her to sit. Flustered with flushed cheeks and tears threatening to spill, she hesitated before finally joining. She sat stiffly, hands folded, laughing nervously. Leon reacted with irritation, focusing instead on the meal, particularly the preparation of the spare ribs. Audi looked at him in confusion, realizing he had no intention of sharing the meal as equals. The realization left her silently staring forward, her expression heavy with disappointment. Sometime later, under a clear sky, a car arrived outside a building. Hadi sat inside and explained that the Hunters Association had approved grants and subsidies for Lion. Though the accommodations could not rival a royal palace, they had arranged a suitable residence. Lion gazed out the window calmly, appreciating the consideration and trusting Hadi to handle the details. When the topic of distributing the spoils arose, his irritation resurfaced. He reminded her that the responsibility was hers, though he made it clear the cloak would remain with him. Hadi quickly agreed, sweat forming on her brow. The car eventually stopped beside a tall white building. Hari gestured excitedly, explaining that the structure stood near the Hunters Association and featured a rooftop helipad for convenience. Leon acknowledged the location seriously, though his attention drifted toward stacks of stones piled nearby. Confusion flickered across his face as he wondered about their purpose. At that moment, Director Park Young-chan of the Jang Group appeared. Hari stiffened instantly, realizing the visit was supposed to be confidential. Young-chan introduced himself smoothly, claiming coincidence, while Hari internally panicked. The Daejeon Group was one of Korea's largest conglomerates, and its director being present was no accident. His mischievous smile made it obvious he had known about their arrival all along. He gestured toward another individual, identifying him as a well-known survivor. Hari could only confirm her suspicion. Young-chan then approached Lion directly, extending his hand with thinly veiled ambition. Leon responded with arrogance, barely acknowledging him. He hurriedly explained the housing arrangement, flipping through documents that outlined the one-year provision, rent-free living, full maintenance, room service, and cleaning, all covered by the association. Despite her tension, she felt relief when Lion completely ignored Young-chan. The secrecy surrounding survivors made the director's interest unsettling. Later, Hadi questioned Lion about Young-chan's intention. Lion gazed outside, hands clasped behind his back, certain that merchants sought only one thing: profit through prophecy. Hari was startled by the implication. Her thoughts immediately turned to the blessed rice from the Hungan plain. Due to the emergency information had slipped through the cracks. An online broadcaster had recorded everything and uploaded it despite warnings. Hari stared angrily at her phone, confirming that the video had resurfaced. The channel responsible belonged to Farmer Park, featuring Lion standing in a field. At the same time, Young-chan watched the same footage on his own phone. Furious, he leaned against the table, venting his rage. He questioned whether the rice's effects were truly reliable. His staff hesitated, admitting there had been no clinical trials. Concerns arose about whether results seen in animals would translate to humans. One assistant nervously explained that while no formal data existed, undeniable events had occurred. An injured dog revived after eating the rice, villagers cured of chronic and minor illnesses alike. Though unofficial, the results were undeniable. Young-chan crossed his arms with a crooked smile, acknowledging that regardless of form, power remained power. He remembered Lion's dismissive attitude, burning with resentment at being treated like an insignificant traitor. His team insisted they must approach Lion again, emphasizing that the rice's potential was limitless. And though tense, Young-chan agreed, slamming his hand on the table. His fury erupted. He could not tolerate being looked down upon. Lion believed himself the center of the universe, all because of a single grain of rice. With a chilling smile, Young-chan convinced himself that Lion was no different from other survivors, men trapped by their own past glory. Holding his phone tightly, he resolved to deliver a true cultural shock, one that would shatter Lion's arrogance completely. Lion's return to Earth marked the beginning of a clear and rigid plan. He set 3 major goals for himself. The first was the spread of faith. Although Earth already had countless gods and followers, none of them possessed truly meaningful holy power. Humanity, in his view, needed faith centered on God, and that faith had to be expanded. The belief that diseases and environmental pollution were divine punishments was fundamentally flawed. To properly wield holy power, a new faith had to be established, and its followers had to grow in number. The second goal focused on rebuilding the Holy Grail Knights. In this world, there was no organized combat unit capable of using holy power. If Lionheart, the guardian of the Holy Grail, stood as a demigod. Then the Holy Grail Knights were living saints who ranked just below him. They were knights of the gods themselves, wielding sacred laws and striking fear into demons. The final goal was the complete eradication of all evil from the land. Faith had to be spread, divinity restored, and the Holy Grail Knights trained according to the proper established order. Among the existing orders, it was unrealistic to expect the sudden appearance of knights who could rival the Holy Grail Knights. Leon looked ahead with a serious expression, concluding that this did not concern him. His task was simply to follow the established path and do what needed to be done. At that moment, his attention shifted when he heard someone call out. Hari appeared, a bead of sweat on her face, holding her phone and reporting that someone had formally requested an audience. Lion responded calmly and confidently, believing that anyone who respected the order deserved to be heard. After some time, Chong Shun entered Lion's room. He carried himself with formality and gratitude, clearly taking the audience seriously. Leon, resting his clenched fist near his face, watched him with interest. Chong Zhen, hiding his true thoughts behind a practiced smile, believed that bowing his head for the sake of corporate profit was an easy price to pay. He had come prepared with a gift. At his signal, an assistant placed a large metal suitcase in front of Lion. Chong Zhen gestured toward it, convinced that once its contents were revealed, Lion would be astonished. The item inside was a luxury product beyond anything Leon had ever imagined. Once exposed to it, Chong Shun believed Leon would never want to return to his old ways and might even request regular deliveries. Lion agreed to accept the gift, framing it as an act of mercy rather than gratitude. Chong Xian internally bristled at the attitude, feeling as though the roles of giver and receiver had been reversed. He suggested opening the suitcase to inspect its contents. Leon, looking tired and uninterested, leaned his face against his hand and gestured to the side, implying that explaining etiquette to merchants was exhausting. He instructed Hadi to open the suitcase. She stepped forward seriously, placed her finger on the handle, and pressed the release. A metal case opened swiftly, revealing its contents. Hari stared in surprise at what lay inside. Chong Xian proudly presented the weapons, explaining that they were the newest creations his company had to offer. Lian was free to choose whichever he preferred. Hadi, visibly amazed, recognized them as unique weapons crafted under the direct guidance of the Duan Guild. Chong Zhen's confidence grew as he emphasized that these were all high-level, one-of-a-kind weapons, ideally suited for someone who would now act as a hunter. Hadi found it hard to believe these were weapons so rare and valuable that money alone could not buy them. During her days as an academy cadet, she had only ever seen such items through videos. Leon, however, leaned forward with a threatening expression and abruptly dismissed the display, questioning why he would ever use such a low-grade weapon. Chong Xian reacted with anger and disbelief, while Hadi turned in shock, wondering if she had truly heard that assessment. Lion regarded them arrogantly and explained his standards. A truly famous sword, in his eyes, had to be bathed in stellar energy and blessed by divinity. Weapons lacking such qualities were no better than tools for hunting animals. Chong Zhen grew increasingly confused, beads of sweat forming as he struggled to comprehend this reasoning. To him, the idea sounded absurd, as though Lion expected weapons to be dried in sunlight and prayed over like preserved food. Leon, unimpressed, remarked that Chongshun's words only inspired mistrust. Trying to recover, Chongshun hastily waved his hand, claiming there had been a misunderstanding. Leon, now clearly bored, dismissed the situation as typical merchant behavior, always eager to praise their goods. He then raised his hand, opening a blue portal from which he drew a sword, radiating immense energy. The comparison was clear. Using the offered weapons was like slaughtering a chicken with a tool meant for a cow. Chongshun stared at the sword in shock as its brilliant aura filled the room. He wondered if it had appeared from nowhere and whether it was some ancient relic. Fear crept into his thoughts, imagining that if Lion truly possessed such a weapon, he would never stop looking down on him. Still attempting to maintain composure, Chong Xiang expressed interest in witnessing the brilliance of Lion's treasured sword. With forced politeness, he turned his attention to Hari, implying she could choose any weapon she liked. Hari hesitated, surprised by the suggestion, then looked toward Lion for confirmation. With renewed confidence, Hari extended her hand toward a red sword. Grasping its hilt, she reflected on the 4 years she had spent waiting for a moment like this. As she examined the blade, recognition and joy filled her expression. She sensed the overwhelming power within it, recalling that it had been tested for 10 days beneath the scorching sun of a special gate. Carrying the sword, she approached Lion, seeking permission through her action. Leon responded coldly, implying that she was treating the weapon like a toy and that there was no need to seek approval from others. Chong Zhen observed the scene, dismissing Lion as nothing more than a strange fanatic. Hati, confused but determined, channeled fiery energy into the sword. Flames enveloped her body as she raised the blade, her aura turning red. With unwavering resolve, she brought the sword down at incredible speed. In an instant, fragments of the blade scattered through the air under the overwhelming pressure of Lion's weapon. Everyone stared in disbelief at the shattered remain. Hari stood frozen, sorrow on her face, gripping the broken hilt. Lian remained calm, holding his own sword effortlessly. He noted that there was not even a trace of fire left. To him, the entire demonstration had been a waste of time, and he declared that the audience would be shortened to 3 minutes and demanded to know the true purpose of Chong Zhen's visit. Chong Zhen staggered back in terror, his mind racing. The weapon that had just broken was the strongest his company had ever developed. The reality was impossible to accept. Sweat streamed down his face as words failed him. Gathering himself, Chong Xian bowed deeply and revealed his real objective. His company wished to obtain a patent for special rice seeds. Leon reacted sharply, questioning what he had just heard. Panicking, Chong Xian hurriedly added that they would pay for it, citing internal calculations that valued it at 180 billion. Inside, Chomian smirked. He knew the price was absurdly low. Seeds capable of curing cancer were worth far more. That there was no way Lion could truly understand the value of such a sum. If it were explained properly, Lion would be shocked. Keeping his face calm, Lion asked whether they truly intended to buy the seeds with money. Chong Zhen rubbed his palms together, realizing he had been seen through. Still, he pushed forward, confirming that money was indeed the method. Contracts could be signed, distribution handled by his company, and the price adjusted through negotiation. Leon's expression darkened with fury. He denounced Chong Shun as a despicable merchant. Flames erupted around him, a lion-shaped aura forming above his head as divine anger surged forth. To Lian, attempting to buy such sacred power with money alone was an unforgivable insult to divinity itself. Lion's thoughts burned with fury at the audacity of a mere merchant, daring to disrespect the deity Chong Xian. At that moment, Chong Shun stared forward in sheer terror, veins bulging across his face as he looked up at the enormous lion-shaped energy looming above him. Sweat streamed down his skin, fear clearly overwhelming him. Lian's anger intensified as the merchant was forced to confront his wrongdoing. Overcome by dread, Chongyan collapsed to the ground, tears pouring from his eyes as his trembling hands pressed against the floor. His entire body shook as he desperately tried to deny any understanding of his crime. Lian, however, remained calm and unmoved. With a simple extension of his hand, the massive energy Lion dissipated into nothingness. His gaze remained sharp as he questioned how someone could be so ignorant and forgetful of divine order. Chong Zhen clenched his teeth tightly, lowering his head as a strange sound escaped him. Leon continued with unwavering confidence, explaining that harvests only flourish because blessed land receives divine grace. Crops exist due to blessings granted by the gods, allowing farmers to cultivate their fields. Such gifts could never be purchased with money. Chun and tribute was meant to be offered through gratitude and faith, not transactions. Lion's eyes narrowed as he concluded that Chong Shun had deliberately misled others while chasing corrupt desires. He questioned how the merchant could ever benefit from sacred offerings while lacking any true devotion. Later, Hari approached Lion, who was standing quietly by the window. She appeared uneasy, clutching a bundle containing a broken sword, and asked whether it was truly acceptable to let director Chong Chun leave so easily. From her perspective, he may have seemed like a simple merchant, but in reality, he held significant influence. Lian responded thoughtfully, stating that the man was not even worth his attention and would never affect him in any meaningful way. Folding his arms, he turned toward Hari and asked whether the preparations he mentioned earlier were complete. Huddy replied that the association had already contacted her. Smiling softly, she explained that this time even His Majesty would be evaluated according to standard procedures. Passing the measurement tests would simplify matters considerably. Leon appeared puzzled by this information, questioning whether they truly intended to test the Liony Heart King. Hadi wondered why he had chosen to go along with it. Leon, still confident, crossed his arms and looked aside, explaining that his true objective was to find capable warriors. This test would serve as a way to evaluate them. Hari, still confused, reminded him that this was merely protocol. Leon interrupted, stating that if the process failed, she should ensure that it succeeded regardless. Tears welled in Hari's eyes as she smiled and looked ahead. Sometime later, Beneath a clear sky, a tall building surrounded by trees came into view. Inside, independent Do-rank Hunter Gon greeted leader Kim Dwan with a cheerful expression, remarking on how long it had been since they last met. Dwan casually placed one hand into his pocket and waved in response, implying that Gi-sun must be there for a rank reassessment. Within the building, a receptionist stood behind the desk as several people in suits waited nearby. Gizon looked surprised as he observed how hard the gentleman was working. Dang laughed awkwardly, a bead of sweat sliding down his face. Duan walked deeper into the building and wondered whether his rank might finally increase this year. Gizon encouraged him to keep trying, though Duan advised him to stop overthinking it and instead consider joining their team. Dustin stared down into his cup with a resigned expression, reflecting on how even incompetent individuals eventually reached Kank, while he himself had remained stuck at Dank for 10 years. Gizon smiled and remarked that someone as diligent as Danin would eventually succeed. He added that the mining team was a decent option. Dion agreed, admitting that he had also been stuck in the same rank for a decade. Despite everything, he still wanted to try again. He understood that without challenging stronger dungeons, even repaying interest would become difficult. With a family depending on him, giving up was not an option. He needed to rise to C rank somehow and retire from his role as a porter. Suddenly, Gizon noticed something unusual and asked whether foreigners were present. Others also turned their attention forward, speculating whether the man standing there was European or simply a foreign worker. Their eyes fell upon Lion, whose presence carried an unmistakable aura of nobility. Someone called out to him, urging him to listen. Gizon approached with a friendly smile and checked whether he was all right. Lion turned around silently, his expression terrifying enough to make it clear that he would not tolerate being addressed casually. Daizan's smile stiffened as fear crept in. Turning his head slightly, he awkwardly wondered whether Lion had somehow learned Korean in an unusual way. Tang, looking stunned, agreed that it seemed so. Recalling Lion's earlier gaze, Tong began to tremble, sweat forming across his face. Dan noticed Tong's condition and asked what was wrong. Wondering if he was injured, Tong felt his breath growing shallow, as if something massive was pressing down on him. At that moment, a worker holding a list loudly called out for number 57, instructing him to proceed to the second office. Startled, Tang quickly responded and hurried forward. Lion watched them closely, his serious gaze following their movements. The worker then turned to Duan and asked whether only one person would be entering. Lion reflected that he was not searching for the strongest individual, yet none of the candidates here were worthy of being called warriors. The process bored him. Most of the participants were either permanently low-level hunters or newly awakened amateurs. Soon after, the worker called out number 77, Draonia Lionheart, directing him to room 9. Leon glanced toward the door, already certain that satisfaction would not come easily. Entering the room with a stern expression, Lion encountered a supervisor holding a list and smiling politely. The supervisor attempted to verify his number, but Lion bristled at the idea of a commoner addressing him improperly. Sweat immediately formed on the supervisor's face as he corrected himself and addressed Lion by his proper status. The supervisor then guided Lion toward the measuring instrument, explaining that touching it was required to pass the test. Lion examined the device calmly. As the warden reviewed the data on his paper, Lion dismissed the entire process as foolish. The warden stared at him in shock as Lion crossed his arms and looked down with irritation, questioning how commoners could dare measure the honor of a knight. The warden raised his hand defensively, explaining that the measurements were conducted by a magical instrument, not people. Lion reacted with outrage, questioning how any instrument could judge a knight's abilities when only noble knights and gods held that authority. The warden, visibly exhausted, asked why Leon had come at all. Lion replied that his purpose was to find a suitable warrior, noting that even the judges present were ordinary individuals. Others quietly wondered whether headhunting had truly become this straightforward, acknowledged that no suitable candidate had appeared yet, and asked about the next phase. He was informed that the real test would take place at the gate. It was explained that true skill emerged through continuous training and real combat experience, which would be observed directly. The warden, feeling uneasy, wondered whether he should simply watch or participate himself. Later at the Soul Station gate, the warden asked whether anyone felt dizzy, noting that passing through gates often caused nausea. While cleared gates were typically closed and cleaned, some were kept open for profit, and the Soul Station gate was one such location. Tung stared ahead tensely, realizing that this year's assessment was no different from previous one. If he wanted his rank to change, he needed to perform well in this practical test. Shannon pointed out the gate while glancing at her phone with a cheerful smile, commenting on how lively the place felt. Shintin calmly instructed his sister to turn off her phone first. Tung grew increasingly anxious as he noticed two inexperienced newcomers and an elderly man over 60 attempting to move from dank to C rank just like him. Turning his head, sweat poured down his face as he realized that the foreigner he had seen earlier was also present. Then a man named Dion stepped forward from the portal, wearing black glasses and radiating confidence. Tung assumed he must be a newly awakened beast-type hunter given his age. Surrounded by newcomers and elderly participants, Tong wondered silently whether everything would truly be all right. Everyone was asked to introduce themselves so that their roles could be decided. Tang stepped forward first, excitement clearly visible on his face. He had been a hunter for a decade and worked as a private combatant specializing as a damage dealer. Shinhan followed with a calm smile, explaining that he had awakened earlier that year and fought using a spear and shield. Shin Nong then introduced herself by placing a hand over her chest, revealing that she was Shin Han's younger sister. Her main weapon was a dagger, though she had recently begun training with a bow as well. Tang wiped sweat from his face as he observed them, immediately judging the two siblings as inexperienced newcomers who had yet to fully understand their abilities. He wondered if they had even trained together properly. Shinan lifted his chin proudly, making it known that he and his sister had been attending training courses for 3 months. Tang, still unconvinced, assumed they were overly confident beginners and turned his confused gaze toward the elderly man beside them. Before Tang could finish his thoughts, Ji interrupted by introducing himself. He had trained for 5 years and used gloves as his weapon. Though awakened, he had recently retired honorably from his company. Tang once again felt uneasy. Compared to his age, Ji's experience seemed lacking, and gloves had poor reach compared to swords or spears. Di scratched the back of his head and turned toward Lion, indicating it was his turn. Tang wondered if Lion was a foreigner who somehow knew Korean. Leon touched his chin with a stern expression and made it clear that he had no intention of fighting lightly, believing that overwhelming power should not be wasted on insignificant enemies. Tong grew even more uneasy, thinking Leon's grasp of the language was strangely advanced. Not long after, the group entered the forest. The test required them to hunt 50 cobalt. Tang recalled the warden's warning that powerful entities might occasionally appear and that intervention would occur if the situation became dangerous. This reassurance allowed them to focus on their abilities, though Tang still felt anxious, especially considering recent incident. Lost in thought, Tong remembered noticing that Lian carried no weapon at all. Singing Nong had offered him her bow, suggesting he try using it and asking if he even knew how to shoot. Leon accepted the bow with clear displeasure, questioning whether it was appropriate for someone of his stature. Shin Nong calmly insisted he could simply return it afterward. Leon responded by throwing the bow to the ground, visibly enraged, declaring that knights did not rely on ranged weapons meant for cowards. Tang snapped back to the present, sweat dripping as he realized that if this continued, the test might end in failure. Trying to regain control, Tang pointed toward another direction and proposed an alternative hunting route. The others smiled and agreed, trusting his greater experience. He confirmed there was a settlement beyond the meadow and reasoned that charging in would be reckless. If they were surrounded, retreat would be impossible. Instead, they planned to attack the kobolds living in a nearby cave. By igniting leaves and grass to create smoke, they could force the kobolds out and strike more easily. Shin Nong looked impressed, acknowledging that experience truly made a difference. Tang, however, felt no pride. To him, this strategy was basic knowledge. He had studied countless tactics in preparation for higher-ranking gates. Yet, he had only ever been stuck in Soul Station. This time, he was determined to rise in rank. Suddenly, Shin Nong cried out in fear as kobolds appeared ahead. Large creatures with saliva dripping from their mouths charged forward while roaring. Tong drew his sword with resolve and ordered the formation. Tun raised his shield in agreement. One kobold lunged with claws raised only to be struck in the face by a glowing axe. Tun smiled as he countered with spear and shield, easily stopping the reckless charge. Shin Nong, sweating nervously, prepared an arrow and warned the others. A kobold leapt toward Tun from behind, but Tong intercepted it, slashing its shoulder and drawing blood. He cautioned the team to remain vigilant, reminding them of the creature's speed. Several kobolds were knocked back by powerful blows, their bodies flying through the air. Ji struck one squarely in the face with his fist, sending it crashing aside. Tang turned with a smile, satisfied with their progress. Time was short, and they needed to maintain this momentum. Soon, someone praised the team's performance. Tun apologized awkwardly for a mistake, but Tong reassured him that errors were normal in a first encounter. With Ning and Ji's support, no one had been injured. Tang praised everyone, feeling confident that despite his early worries, the team worked well, except for one person. Leon stood silently with his hand on his chin, observing. Tang confronted him, questioning why he hadn't participated in the fight. Shin Nong agreed, pointing out that Lion had only watched. She even asked the guard if such behavior was acceptable. The guard dismissed their concerns, stating that this would be evaluated appropriately. Accepting this, Tom led the group deeper into the forest, stating they would soon reach a cave. Moments later, he stopped in surprise, holding hay in his hand as the illuminated rocky terrain revealed the cave's entrance. Gripping his sword, he ordered the plan to proceed. Hay was placed at the cave entrance. Tong, visibly tired, prepared a lighter. Leon questioned whether this plan was truly the best option. Angered, Tong turned back and demanded to know what Lion wanted, especially since he had not contributed. Leon crossed his arms, calmly questioning the plan's reliability. Tang defended his strategy, insisting it had worked successfully 3 times before. Lion dismissed this as shallow experience and extinguished the lighter flame, openly challenging Tang's authority. Enraged, Tang ignited the hay,